Hello. Welcome to the 35th Annual Lorette LaPrevost Writers Symposium. My name is Katie Hoover, and I'm the coordinator of Oral and Written Communication Department at Caldwell, where we are. We're so pleased to have everyone here for this event, even if you're doing it for a class. The Writers Symposium Committee would like to thank all of our colleagues and campus partners. This includes our culinary program, our art department, social sciences department, our campus bookstore who's selling books outside if you're interested, our learning resource center, our student activities, and our maintenance staff. So this event and many others like it are made possible by the college's foundation office as well. A couple of housekeeping things. So while you're in here, if you do not mind, please silence your cell phones or other devices so that they're not going off during the event. If you need to, there are restrooms down the hall, and you're welcome to go to those. I know that some of you have classes or places that you need to be at a specific time, so you are welcome to go and do that. I just ask that you do it in the most respectful way possible as while we're having our event and talks. So this year, the theme for the whole symposium is Food for Thought. We're focusing on the ways that food binds us together as a community and provides insights into our history and culture. So today, we're pleased to have two speakers. Each of our speakers are novelists and professional journalists and not only collaborate professionally, but also personally through their marriage. Irina Zhorov is an award-winning journalist reporting primarily on environmental issues, and her work has appeared on National Public Radio. Her first novel, Lost Believers, was published by Scribner in August 2023. Caleb Johnson's work has appeared in Garden and Gun, Southern Living, Wall Street Journal, and other publications. His debut novel, Treeborn, received an honorable mention for the Southern Book Prize and was longlisted for the Crooks Corner Book Prize. Today, they will be sharing their experiences as professional writers, as well as experience with food and food writing. So, welcome, Caleb and Irina.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for being here today. It's nice to see all y'all's faces, and thank you so much, Katie, for inviting us to speak today. We lived up the mountain in Boone for 4 years until we moved down to the Gulf Coast, I guess about a year and a half ago, so it's nice to come back up this way and be at elevation to some degree and it not be so hot and humid like it is back home in Mobile, and we're just very thrilled to be part of this today. So thank y'all for being here. We're going to kind of talk to each other, ask some questions, share with y'all a little bit about the work we do and why we do it. And then we're going to save some time at the end for questions from y'all. So please go ahead now and start thinking of your very best questions that you'd like to ask us, and we'll answer them as honestly and as interestingly as we possibly can. But I thought a good place to start would be for us to tell you a little bit about how we got into writing about food in particular and what interests each of us. So, Irina, how did you get into this racket and what interests you about writing on food?
So my family is from the Soviet Union, and I was born in Uzbekistan, where we have really incredible markets. They're all outdoor, and there's a really big variety of fruit. They pile it up in little pyramids, and you walk in the market and everything smells so good. The fruit is so sweet. It's all grown like basically in the city. And when we moved to the States, my grandmother would constantly complain about how terrible the fruit is here. She'd be like, the melons are atrocious. Like, it was a real point of contention for her. She thought the food here was awful. And, you know, we'd didn't have grocery stores. Someone had to take us to a grocery store, show us how it works, show us like what all the boxes of food are. It was a completely different way of eating and a completely different way of cooking and thinking about food. And I mean, I say all this in retrospect. I don't think I was thinking about this as a 7-year-old, but I think from a very young age, I got interested in how different these systems are. The way that you would go to the bazaar every day and pick up the 3 things you needed versus the way that we go to the grocery store here and stock up for a week like we do now, with completely different things. And so I think thinking about the different systems that produce like one version of food procurement and cooking versus another is kind of what got me interested in food and has kept me thinking about food for many, many years at this point, because it influences everything else. It influences how I spend my time cooking and how long it takes me to get food and what the food tastes like and everything, literally. And so I have found for me that food is a really good conduit for thinking about other things. So like about farming and how do we grow food and how do we use our land and who's doing the farming and how are we thinking about like protecting our environment and water usage and money, who can afford to eat what and how. I just have found, maybe because of those earlier experiences and having to kind of reconceptualize how I thought about food personally, it has kept me asking questions. And I have found, in my reporting at least, that food is just a great way to think about anything as an in. Because there's nobody who doesn't think about food to some extent. Like you can maybe avoid reading about politics. I don't recommend it, but you can. Or like you can avoid news about, a million other topics, but like everybody thinks about food in one way or another. Personally, maybe you think about it more deeply, less deeply, but you're thinking about food and what you're going to eat. And so it's a good way to enter. It's a good entry point to telling bigger stories, whether it's about the environment or economics or land use or literally anything. So I think that's kind of what's kept me interested in it and how I started thinking about it in the first place. How about you?
So I grew up, I was born in North Alabama and grew up in this rural community and graduated high school with 28, 30 people, like really tiny school. And when I was growing up in rural Alabama in the 90s and early 2000s, it was not cool at all to be from the South, like in terms of popular culture at large. I'm still not sure it is, but there's at least more of like kind of these niche cultural kind of bubbles we can find ourselves and find some kind of regional and cultural pride in. And so I very much tried to rebel and push back against everything about my rural Southern upbringing. And then as I went to college and finished college and kind of was getting ready to, and I was working and getting ready to go back for graduate school to study creative writing, a thing happened where there were like some Southern chefs, like Sean Brock is one, he's an Appalachian chef, who became hip and opened some restaurants that got media attention. And then there were these publications that were looking at our region and culture and cultures in kind of interesting, thoughtful ways. And there were places to tell Southern stories that weren't just like Southern living, which I've written for them, but I would always see that magazine on the coffee table. My mom would read it, and that was not the most appealing thing for me as a young person to want to write for a publication that my mama subscribed to and read. But there was this thing happening where these publications were bubbling up, and I was reading them and I was feeling energized, and I was thinking more about who I was and where I was from in ways that I hadn't before, even when I had gone to college. Just was a conversation that wasn't happening. And so like more literally how I got into food writing is it was, it must have been around 2014 when I did my first piece, and we were living in Pittsburgh at the time. We'd moved there for Irina's public radio job, and I was trying to finish my novel, and I eventually became a whole animal butcher there in Pittsburgh, and that was my day job. I would get these animal carcasses from farmers around the city, and they would bring them into this market I worked at, and I learned how to cut them up into the retail cuts of meat that y'all would see in the grocery store and buy and take home and cook. So I was kind of like getting in touch with food and where my meat was coming from in that way. And then I heard about this place down in West Virginia, this brother and sister who were reviving their family's salt making business. And I was like, wow, I hadn't thought about where a lot of my food came from, to be honest with you, but I was like, I never thought about where my salt came from, or if there could be salt coming from the South or from Appalachia, so I got really interested in this, and not many people had written about them at this point. And I kind of started working and like bugging Irina about like, how do I get a pitch up for this? Like, how do I tell this story? Like help me with it. And we ended up collaborating on it. And I did an audio piece, a podcast episode about this family. And to your point about food being a way to talk about and think about and write about all these other things, their story was that. It's like I got to write about the environment, and I got to write about pollution. I got to write about this family and their history. I got to write about like the use of prison labor and enslaved people in terms of like food production in Appalachia in the South. And then I also got to taste this really amazing product, this salt, and learn about how it was made, like hands-on, and kind of see that process. It was interesting, and then I got to share with listeners, that process and have them learn something. So that's how I got into it, and then once my foot was in the door, I just started seeing, I know it's kind of like in a movie, when I don't know, like a mathematician or whatever, like the equations are going around their head in the air, it's like I started seeing all these connections and ideas and stories around me, even though I wasn't living in the South at the time. I always kept one foot firmly planted in the region when we lived up north. And I just started pitching more and more and writing more and more because largely I was curious, and I think that's the best. I teach creative writing now down in Mobile, Alabama, and the thing I tell my students most of all, it kind of feels like a scam to me that I'm teaching it, because like what you really need to know is, first things first, you got to write about what kind of sets your hair on fire, what's curious to you. And if you're not doing that, then nobody's going to be very interested by what you've written. Like readers are not going to care, So it's like I started looking for stories that compelled me in that way, and they just so often happen to be in food, which I guess makes sense coming from where I come from.
Do you want to talk, these are mine, but do you want to talk about some of your stories?
I don't know. Maybe we'll wait on that, I guess, for now. And or I could talk about one. You mean to talk about some of the personal writing? Would that be good?
Yeah. Caleb does a lot more personal writing than I do, and I
the video, and then but don't play it yet in a second.
Caleb does a lot more personal writing, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you find stories that are kind of universal, or at least of interest to people beyond your experience.
Well, one reason I do a lot more personal writing is because I'm not as talented as a reporter and real journalist as Irina is, and so I can't lean into those skills as much. But I talk. So in teaching my students creative writing, whenever we get to the creative nonfiction unit in this intro to creative writing class, I find two things that usually happen. It's like the students will fall into two camps. Either there's a group of students who they feel very passionate about these personal stories they want to tell about themselves, and the problem is like kind of turning off that faucet to a degree. And then the other camp is like students who have a hard time seeing or realizing that they have a story, worth telling about themselves. So it's like trying to come at the problem from two different angles. But the solution to either one really is like, yes, we all have these personal experiences that are singular in some way, that are particular, and only we can tell them in our particular voice from our particular perspective. But how is that going to matter, my personal stories to y'all, or to someone else, on the other side of the planet? And that's what we're kind of trying to get at when I talk to my students about kind of striking this universal chord, And so, for example, I'll show you this video in a second, which is an example of this personal piece. But several years ago, I wanted to write about, I was living out west, and I was trying to learn how to make biscuits at my home. Like I'd never made homemade biscuits, and my mama would just buy frozen Pillsbury biscuits because she was busy and raising two kids, and that's, if we're gonna have biscuits, that was quicker. But her dad, my pawpaw, was kind of like, he died when I was young, but he was sort of like renowned in the family for these biscuits he would make. And I don't remember having them, maybe I did when I was little, but I wanted to try to figure out how to make them, So it's like interviewing my mom about what she remembered, how he did it, and then I was trying to recreate it out west. at 7,200 feet above sea level, which if you know much about baking, that's in a really dry, it was just kind of tough. The biscuits were kind of coming out like a little hard hockey pucks that tasted kind of buttery. And but I was like, I want to write about this. It's what compels me right now. But I was like, who's going to care about you trying to make biscuits like your pawpaw? And so what I had to figure out was like how to strike this universal chord of things that more people at least can relate to, which is like being geographically displaced, interrogating your family history and memory. How does memory work? You know, because I was interviewing my mom and the recipe isn't written down. She was having to remember and then kind of like try things at home based on her memory and then communicate that to me. So it became about these bigger ideas. And yeah, a lot of my writing does tend to kind of go toward that personal place than reported pieces. But this one, I'll show you. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
So I did not grow up in the South. I never had a biscuit until after I met Caleb. And this is just to the point where, like, if you interrogate food, you can interrogate it in a million different ways. So I got interested in why people love biscuits so much in the South. I was like, there's got to be a reason, like kind of what's the historical evolution? And so many years later, I actually ended up reporting a different story that asked that question. And the answer to that is because the kind of flour that grew here is more appropriate for a bread that does not rise. So the breads I was used to, which are like crispy, kind of like sourdough breads, you can't bake them with the kind of flour that grows here and that has grown here historically. And so it's like a completely different way of thinking about the biscuit. Like I wanted to understand why he was so obsessed with biscuits. And like what I found was a story of like land use and the kind of crop that would grow here and how much protein this flour would have. So it's also a story about biscuits, but obviously very different.
And my answer to her question was butter. Have you heard of it? It's amazing. It's good in everything. Okay, so I'm going to show you all a clip of this video. It's a print piece I wrote for the Southern Foodways Alliance. They asked me to participate in their symposium one year. It was actually during COVID. They did it digital and or online. And the theme was the future of food. And I was thinking, man, I don't feel even very aware of the present kind of culture and moment a lot of times, let alone the future. Like, what am I going to write about? But it just so happened that at the time, Irina was pregnant with our son, Felix, who's now 3. And I thought, well, I can't imagine the future of food in the South or like any kind of future right now without imagining it, you know, related to him, like, or through him and us as this kind of growing family. So I wrote this piece, a letter to my unborn son. And then the cool thing about the symposium being online, I was bummed not to get to go in person and be with everybody face to face, but they sent a documentary filmmaker to everyone who spoke that made these little short documentaries of your written piece where you read it. So you get this little short film. So I'm not going to play the whole thing, but I will ask Savannah to play the first maybe minute or minute and a half so you can get an idea of one of these more personal pieces. And you can see this beautiful place we used to live up in Boone, too. I'm trying to get this in one shot. Okay. Dear son, I've never been a picky eater, but I didn't care for the food served in the cafeteria at my elementary school. So when I was 6 years old, your grandmother began packing a lunch for me. She's always indulged my appetites. Even now, she'll drop everything and fix a special meal on request. That year, first grade at Farmstead Elementary, my teacher, Miss Miller, sat with us during lunch. This made an impression on me then. Many of my classmates got free lunch, and Miss Miller often shared her food with them. She asked us lunch bringers what we had to eat. No one had ever expected me to consider the food I put in my body. Your grandfather was a coal miner. He and your grandmother, who quit an hourly job at downtown bank to raise me, concerned themselves with how to feed their family, less so with what we ate. Shopping for groceries involved calculations, compromises, clipping coupons, but there's power in an adult showing interest in a child's thoughts. I likely wouldn't be writing this letter to you, writing anything at all without Miss Miller's early encouragement. Nor would my interest in food be quite the same if I hadn't sat across from the lunch table and observed the unmistakable pleasure she took in butter and a hunk of bread. Before that day, it never crossed my mind what other people ate. But something about the way Miss Miller buttered her bread struck me as sophisticated and foreign. My deli meat, crackers, and cheese seemed boring in comparison. I felt an urge to understand why, to try something new. So that afternoon, I described Miss Miller's lunch to your grandmother
and asked if I could have the same. Credit her for recognizing my curiosity and encouraging me. One fall day, she picked up a huge French-style loaf from the only bakery within 40 miles of home. It was inside the Walmart Supercenter. The next day, your grandmother packed me a hunk along with a Tupperware containing a generous helping of country crock. For years, I thought this vegetable oil-based spread was actual butter made from cow's milk, because that's what we called it at home.
Thanks, Savannah. So that's a preview of that. Like I said, that was a print piece. I started out and wrote, this essay. Thinking about the future of food. And so I wrote this it's to my unborn son, but I tried to write about from a personal place and then get to bigger ideas that might, move or at least interest, other people who have families, whether you have kids or not, and other people who are going to live in this region going forward and eat here and grow food here. Maybe, Irina, I think I've been talking a lot, which I'm prone to do, so it'd be good, you tend to report more, do more reported pieces and kind of harder journalism than I do, so would you talk a little bit about what that looks like, what interests you about getting to work in that mode?
Yeah, so I used to work in newsrooms, mostly kind of public radio newsrooms, but now I work as a freelancer and I get to do more long-form stories where I can kind of lean in and let the story unfold a bit more, where it's not just like, this is the thing that happened. And what I think this was always my inclination, but now I just have more freedom to do it. But what I'm always interested in is systems. So I want to understand how something works really intimately. I want to understand what's making it work that way. I want to understand who's affected and why. And so that's kind of always my place of starting. So just to give an example, right now we live in the Gulf. I've never lived near water before, and everybody there fishes. And when we moved there, I thought, oh, we're going to have amazing seafood all the time. And we do, more than we did in Boone, but it's very hard to find seafood, especially seafood that was caught locally and where I can meet the person who's catching it. I thought that was my dream, that I would just march up to boats and get pounds of shrimp. And sometimes that happens, but it's really hard to find fish. And so I got curious. I wanted to understand why. And that's kind of my entry point. I report out all my frustrations. And so, people love to eat red snapper, and I started wondering, why is it so hard to find red snapper if everybody's apparently catching it? And it turns out, red snapper, it's one of the most, complicated fish that's being managed in this country. There's 1,000 rules that they have to take into account before they decide this is how many pounds of snapper you can catch if you have a permit. And so I was really trying to understand, well, where did this 1,000 rules come from? And what is the history of snapper? At one point we fished so much snapper out of the waters that there was hardly any left. And then they started making rules about who can catch it, when, and how are they gonna build back the population? And so that made me curious, okay, who's actually managing this? How are they counting the fish? That's its whole own thing. Are they using models, or is somebody going out and actually sitting in a spot and trying, with a camera count snapper? That's crazy. And it turns out both, they use models and that. But that's always kind of my entryway, is to understand how this supposedly simple thing of I want a fillet of snapper for dinner. There's so many moving parts to make that happen or not happen, and how much it costs, and who do I get it from, and is it managed at the state level or federal level, and so when I start reporting, I try to answer those questions for myself to understand the system. But those things are really boring, actually, a lot of them. And so then I have to find the person that's affected by this. Are there fisher people that get affected by all these rules? Is it really complicated for them? And it turns out it is. There's a whole red snapper mafia And it's really hard to get these permits. And the people who have had them for years and years before all these new rules went into effect, they make a really nice business of selling these permits at really at a high upcharge, right? So that's interesting. There's a guy who's been fishing for decades and can no longer afford this permit. So what happens, So basically, once I understand the system, I try to wheel it back a little bit and say, who's the person affected by all this? Who's the guy, And I try to find that person to tell me their story. Now, that person may not understand how the system works. They just know that they can't get the permit to catch snapper, which their family has been eating for generations, and now he no longer can do it. And so I think that's the real story, is how people get affected and what they do with that, how they problem solve. But often to understand how that works and how we get there, you have to understand the system. So that's basically how I approach any story. I try to get the nitty-gritty of all the really boring government regulations and all that, and then I try to find the person through whom I can tell that story in a more accessible way so that people actually care. Because if you talk about just policy in a piece, nobody cares ever. And I find I report a lot on environmental issues. I find that's especially true for environmental issues.
Maybe you can talk, I keep forgetting about the slides back there, but since you do a lot of audio work, and this is a reported piece, maybe you could talk about it a little bit, and we'll hear a clip.
Yeah, so I work in print and I work in audio, and they function kind of differently. Print you can read if you glaze over. If there is a policy piece, you glaze over, you go back to the paragraph, you reread it until you get it, or you can always go back to it. Audio, you're often in your car or at the gym or whatever, you're listening. You're not going to be paying attention to numbers. You're not going to be rewinding, to hear the part that you missed. And so I think the formats function somewhat differently, because with audio, what you really are trying to do is convey an emotional, the emotional stakes. And not only that, but the people you're talking to, they have the opportunity to convey it themselves. You hear their voice, you hear their accent, you hear how they talk, you hear if they're nervous or emotional. So rather than writing a tear fell from her eye, you can hear it in their voice. And I feel like there's a lot of power in that. And so it also affects how I report out the stories. In print, you have to just report it out in a lot more detail. It's important to have those numbers. It's important to have links so people can go there. In audio, when I'm asking questions, my number one question I ask someone I'm interviewing is, how did you feel when that was happening? It gets people talking in a different way. It gets them telling a story in a different way. And when I put together the story, I try to let people kind of talk as much as they will, rather than me telling their story, so that they will tell their own stories. So this is one story I reported. This is also for the Southern Foodways Alliance. I do a lot of work for them. And this was a series I did about power and food, one of my favorite things to write about. And this story specifically was it was kind of an investigative piece about food in prisons in the South. And the South has some of the lowest budgets for food per person. In a lot of prisons, it's less than $1 per meal per person, or per day per person, that is spent on meals. In a lot of prisons, especially on non-work days, people are only getting 2 meals a day. There's very little that they can do in terms of asking for exceptions to diet. A lot of people suffer health effects from the bad diets in prisons. There's a lot of carbs, not a lot of nutrients. Often the food tastes bad. And so this was kind of a piece looking into all of these things, and specifically in the South. And I interviewed 2 women who were formerly incarcerated that talked about their experiences and how it changed how they thought about food. And this is the beautiful thing with audio. I had this was not a positive story. Like, this was a story about how hard it was to eat in prison and to feel good in your body doing it. And now that they're out, they're still feeling the effects of that and still dealing with it every day. But one of the awesome things with audio is that you can also, it's still people. People still have joy no matter the circumstance. Almost always there are moments of joy. And so that I wanted to play a piece of that. This is both of the women talking about.
I was in this one prison that was 7 transgender women who were there with me. One of the things that we did was, with the commissary items that we had, we often made meals together. I remember this one time, it was New Year's, and we made like a cake out of honey bun, Hershey's chocolate, with like Happy New Year with M&M's written on it.
Lupa recalls similar celebrations. She says people would often make something called a pocket out of ramen.
And that's where you would take and you would put the dry soups in like a bowl or a trash bag or whatever.
You'd add in chips, pickles, sausages, and always a bunch of hot sauce.
Mix it all up together and then pour hot water on it to just wet it good and then cap it, like put it under a blanket or something to hold heat in and let it cook, and it thickens up and it's like a casserole type thing.
She remembers one Christmas.
And I got like 12 people together with me. We all put in like $5 or $6 worth of food. And so we got up as soon as the lights came on in the morning and went out in the freezing weather outside so we didn't wake everybody up, busting up soups and dumping them in multiple big trash bags.
They made an enormous pocket and fed about 70 people.
We actually made little invitation cards that we gave out to people that we knew that didn't have anything. It was just doing something good without expecting something back. And those were good times.
Up next, we explore the long term.
So I think audio in particular gives a lot of opportunities to let people tell their stories kind of in a fuller way. Not that you can't do it in print, but it always feels more powerful than if I would have written about the pocket, because she gets to tell it and you feel joy in her voice. And actually later on in the story, I'm interviewing her in her like lazy boy chair. She gets up and she takes me to her cupboard and she opens it up and she's like, this is all my ramen. I still keep it here because it reminds me of those times. And I still eat it, it's my comfort food. So yeah, it's nice. I like audio because you get to include moments like that and it feels very, I don't know. Everybody can relate to that. Everybody has a comfort food. Yeah, but we both write fiction. We both have novels out, and we both write about food in that sort of context as well. And I wonder, do you want to talk a little bit about how food features in your fiction, how you think about it when you're writing fiction?
Yeah, and Savannah, if you can go to there's a slide with like a few different, it's like screenshots of a few different stories of mine too, and I'll maybe get to those two next. Maybe yeah, that was it, back one. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so with fiction, I try to my novel Treeborn, a lot of it takes place on a peach orchard in this fictional Alabama town. And the reason for that is kind of twofold. Number one, when I was growing up, if we got to go on a beach vacation, we go to Gulf Shores, Alabama. And about halfway there is this area called Chilton County, Alabama, and it's Alabama's peach growing region. And it was such a treat in the summer to get to go to the beach, first off, but then second off, to stop there and buy a basket of these Chilton County peaches, and then you would take them with you and like eat them on the beach, and they're like so juicy, so you wanted to like eat them out by the water, so you just drip all over you and be a messy snack, or eat them over the kitchen sink. And that's just like such a nostalgic memory for me. And then somehow or another, I got to reading about, I thought I might write a novel about Hernando de Soto's conquest through the American South. And I was like researching that some, and then I read in there that the peach came to America via the Spanish, De Soto's conquest, and it had been like come on the Silk Road from China. It was a Asian fruit originally, and I was kind of ignorant, I guess, and I thought, oh wow, I just kind of assumed, Georgia and South Carolina and Alabama, I guess I was like, the peach must be a native fruit. I just had never thought about it. So I got fascinated by that, and as it goes with me writing fiction, I don't really know anything going in. I know very little. Like whatever idea or interest I have, it's a voice, it's a setting, it's one character, it's a line. I'm just discovering, which means I have to write a lot of early drafts and words that I just throw away because they're just my discovery until I get to the actual story. So part of that discovery for this novel was peaches, and it's set in a peach orchard. There's a peach festival. The whole town kind of culturally and thematically and symbolically glooms on to De Soto and the peach for different reasons. If you read the novel, you'll see. But when it comes to fiction at large, I just think about how like sometimes, you ever watch a movie and they like never eat or go to the bathroom or sleep or like do any of the things our body requires that we maybe don't want to talk about even, because it's like not in polite company, but you're just kind of like, it doesn't feel human, right? Like we are humans who exist in these bodies that have their needs. They have to take stuff in, put stuff out, and so it feels weird to me to be writing about humans and not sometimes, it doesn't have to be grotesque or gratuitous, but it's like, people eat food and they, go to the bathroom and they make love with each other and they do all these other things, where it's like, why wouldn't it be in fiction if in a novel if it's about humanity? It just doesn't make sense. And so I try to have stuff like that in there again, not in a gratuitous or grotesque way, but just because it's part of what it is to be human, is to eat, whether it's by ourselves, and why we do that, or in company, with other people, kind of in fellowship. And so it feels essential to me if my fiction is going to kind of feel human and real, quote unquote, to me. Should I talk about a couple of these real quick, or do you want to talk about your fiction first instead of jumping? Why don't we do that and then you can?
Okay.
Yeah.
My novel is about a geologist that's exploring for iron in Soviet Siberia, and while they're exploring and trying to figure out if there's any iron there, they instead find this family that's been hiding out for decades of old believers. And this family, who has kids who are now middle-aged, basically, has, those kids have never met anybody outside their family. It's the first time they're encountering somebody else. And so they become friends. It's like a very strange friendship because they come from completely different worlds. So it's a novel set in the Soviet Union. It's about this friendship kind of out in the middle of nowhere in Siberia, but it also comes back to Moscow, to the city. And I wanted to, you mentioned that you don't know anything about the book going in, and I often don't know anything about what's happening because I have a hard time with plot. Basically, the way I operate, I get an image and I'm like, I want to convey how intense this image is in my head to the reader. I don't know what purpose it serves, but I want this on the page. And so a lot of, I guess, the moments or the scenes where food appears in my book, it was that, I was just thinking about very extended family dinners of mine around loaded tables and how those felt to have 12 hours of coming and going of friends and laughter and what that smelled like and what that tasted like. I really wanted to kind of, especially because I knew most of my readers here may not be familiar with the food I'm describing. I just got a lot of joy out of really sitting there and trying to think of all those things and convey them and putting them in that scene because they would be so intense in my head. And I feel like that also helped convey the cultural and the aesthetic place that I was writing about too. I think food is a really good shorthand for those things as well, and that's often why I focus on it too. But yeah, those are yours. Do you want to start off?
Yeah, we can just say a couple things. Mm-hmm. So up here we got some screenshots of a few nonfiction pieces. And I guess I should say I turned in my revised draft of my next novel to my agent recently and waiting to hear back from her. But it all takes place, or it doesn't all, but it largely takes place on a dairy farm in rural Alabama over the course of the 20th century. So there's a lot of milk and dairy products and being produced and consumed in this novel too. And I haven't really thought too much about that yet, but I'll have to eventually when I start talking about the book more. Okay, so here are some pieces, and I just wanted to say something about a couple. The one on the top right is it's technically a travel essay I wrote for the Wall Street Journal, but I'm going to tell you something cool for any of you that want to be writers and become writers one day in our publishing is like when you get to a certain point, you can kind of start, well, Irina has much more admirable and noble reasons for doing her journalism and nonfiction writing than I do. For example, I'm like, I wonder if I want to do this thing, but I don't want to spend my money on it. So I wonder if someone would pay me to go do it and then write about it for them. And it turns out they will, if you can convince them of it. So the top right, the Wall Street Journal paid me to go spend a weekend in Gulf Shores in Orange Beach, Alabama, which is close to home now, but I got to stay in a hotel on the beach, and I brought Irina with me. And
admirable, I just tag along.
Yeah, and the great thing is it's a travel piece, but we had a list of restaurants and places we wanted to go eat, and for the piece, of course, and we did. And so the Wall Street Journal, paid for some meals for us over the weekend in a hotel. And so that's fun, and that's a treat. Writing is hard, and a lot of times, there's a lot of rejection, and sometimes you can feel like you're sort of just like shouting into a black hole to a degree, or at least I can on my worst days. And so to do something fun is nice, And then on the bottom left is a piece I did for the Paris Review website. It's called What Really Killed Walt Whitman. And I'll pause to give a shout out. My buddy Matthew Wimberly is here. He's a fantastic poet from Beech Mountain that teaches at Appalachian State. And this is our friend Savannah Murray, who also teaches at Appalachian State. So if y'all are ever thinking about matriculating up the mountain, make sure you take a writing class with both or either one of them. But Matthew and Matthew's a poet, like I said, and a big fan of Walt Whitman. And somehow I got to reading about, the New York Times had these time capsule things where when he was dying, like in his last days, they were sending a reporter over there like every day to check on him. And what I realized is in these pieces in the newspaper, they kept writing about what Whitman had been eating and drinking. And it's like, depending on what his diet was, I guess it was supposed to indicate he's like in good health because he's eating a lot, or it's like he only had a little bit of milk, And I kept noticing he was drinking a lot of milk. And I was like, why is this, like, what was going on with him or historically? And so I started reading more about milk, and this was raw milk, it was like pre-pasteurization and stuff. And there was a lot of health issues around it, and where the milk was coming from. He lived in Camden, New Jersey, outside Philadelphia. The dairy facilities, the milk facility, it was just filthy. And so people were getting like tuberculosis and like all kinds of stuff. And so as kind of a joke, me and Matthew were talking about this. I posited that I was like, what if what killed him was like tuberculosis from all this milk he contracted from a cow, which can happen. So like I started interviewing all these like infectious disease experts and reading this stuff in old newspapers. And in doing that, of course, and here's the thing about being a writer, sometimes you just have to take one for the team, Milk punch was prescribed by doctors a lot of times, which is an alcoholic drink. It's basically just a milk cocktail with like some nutmeg and sweetener in it of some kind. Bourbon and milk is what it is. And so I was finding all these old cocktail recipes for that, and I said, well, I don't think I can write this piece without making one of these milk punch recipes from Walt Whitman's time and trying it myself. Like I would be a bad journalist if I didn't. And luckily I had a good friend who's also a poet that was willing to risk life and limb and drink raw milk punch with me for the piece. And so that scene is in the essay. So I'm just saying that to say, I try to have fun. My fiction often ends up not being very fun for me to write. It's a lot of toil and hard work and doubt. But with my nonfiction, I try to find things that interest me and would kind of resonate in some way, but I also want to enjoy doing them. It's like a chance for me to get out in the world. I got to be on the phone with these infectious disease experts who were like humoring me about like if TB could have killed Walt Whitman. And there were no stakes in it for them. They had more important things to do, but it was nice to talk to them in that way. And so I try to kind of get out in the world in that way with my nonfiction and have fun, and food. Writing about food is a great way to do it.
Will you go back one?
I think I go forward one.
No, mine was first,
Okay.
yeah. I tried to pick a couple of slightly different stories just to talk about the different kind of things you can explore when you're thinking about food. So the one on the bottom left, that was actually one of the more fun stories I ever got to do. So this was about close to a decade ago. Russia, where you could, in Russia, you don't go to a restaurant and eat a steak. They don't have steaks. And the way that meat worked there is they had a lot of dairy farms, and from the Soviet times, those were like really big operations. And when the dairy farms had, served their time and could no longer make milk, they would slaughter them. And at that point, the meat was often like very rangy, it's like not good quality meat. So the best you could do is like ground meat or just like a very rough, kind of tough piece of meat. And about a decade ago, Russia decided, like at the highest levels from the president on down, they were like, we're going to make steaks. We're a developed country now, we have power, like we deserve steaks. And so they invested all this money, and they were trying to set up a system where they had ranches where they'd never had any before. So they needed fences, and they needed bull semen, and they needed cows that were appropriate for steaks, and they needed cowboys, which they'd also never had. And they were importing all these things in ridiculous huge numbers. They were flying in all these things, getting them in by boat. And they were setting all this up, but their cowboys could not figure out how to work. They didn't know how to cowboy. It's a very specific skill. So they started importing American cowboys to Russia. They would bring them off ranches from Wyoming and Idaho and Colorado and Australia also. And they would be please teach our cowboys to cowboy. And so I got to go to Russia, and we went to graduate school in Wyoming. This is where I actually learned about the story, was from a guy who was selling his bull semen to Russia. And I was like, what? Tell me more. So I got to go to Russia and meet some of these cowboys in training. They would be wearing slacks and business casual shoes, getting on a horse, because that's all they had. And a lot of the American cowboys would leave them their boots when they left. That was their parting gift of you did it. You're a cowboy now, you need real boots. But what it was a funny story, because in this story, a lot of them didn't know how to ride horses still. They didn't know how to control them fully. So they were trying to herd cows on bicycles with their bells. So there was moments of humor in it, but what it really was a story about Russia coming into its power, and this was one way it showed it. It felt like it had the economic means, and they wanted to show their status in this one very specific way. None of the cowboys could afford the steaks. This was steaks for people with money. And so that's what the story was really about, but I got to tell it through these kind of more humorous moments, hanging out. I went to a rodeo in Russia, so there's lots of ins to a story. Let's see. The story on the bottom right is another example where it's again, as you can see, I report on beef a lot, but what the story, purports to be about is Navajo Nation in Arizona starting this sustainable beef operation. But what it actually is about is a more recent kind of dispossession of land. They were kicked off these specific parcels of land through a big federal lawsuit. And whole families were moved to new parcels of land, and they had to bring their livestock with them. And they had less land, and now the way that that land was managed was controlled. They weren't making their own decisions. There were rules about how many animals, how many cows you could have per acre or whatever. And it completely changed the way that these specific families took care of their livestock. So it is a story about okay, the decisions we're making now lead to a more sustainable steak, but it's also a land about, Navajo Nation and how they, at these specific moments in time, were not controlling their destiny because they kept getting moved off their land, and how it affected everything from family dynamics to how they managed their livestock. The top right story, it's about a peach farmer in Georgia, but it's really about climate change because this farmer, it's never getting cold enough for his peaches to make anymore. And so he's working with breeders to figure out a new kind of peach that will survive in this climate and be able to make so that he can keep growing peaches in his orchard, which has been in his family for generations. So it just kind of goes back to like a food story is never just about the food you're writing about. It's always about something bigger and something different. Oh. Yeah.
Can you go to the last slide really quick, and we can just kind of quickly say that, and then
Yeah.
go to questions.
So I guess one thing I want to mention is that I feel like it's a really exciting time to be writing about food and thinking about it. It's opened up in so many ways. People have a real hunger for different stories, for thinking about food in ways we haven't before, for challenging how we think about food or the narratives around it. And there's a lot of different kind of venues that are doing that in different ways, so in audio, in print, in video. And so we just put some up as examples. Bon Appetit, Taste, Whetstone is like a growing empire that has podcasts and print and magazines. Sybil Eats reports on food in a newsier way, but they have podcasts too. Did you want to add?
I just want to say, as a teacher and somebody whose job is to mentor young writers, it's never too soon or too late to get started pitching or publishing or working on bylines. So your high school newspaper, your college newspaper, your local newspaper, just a website that you read, it really doesn't matter when you're starting out. It's like getting the practice in, starting to acquire some bylines, and writing about what you want to write about, in a way that inspires you and kind of compels you, is what's important. It doesn't matter what the place is if you're getting to tell your story, and you all have stories to tell. And then we'll take questions from you all in a second, but then also we'll just welcome you. You can, Irina and I, or you can find us online. If you have questions to follow up from this talk or advice or anything we can do, just send us an email. We're pretty easy to find on the internet. So questions, things y'all want us to expand on, things we didn't talk about that you would be curious to know. Does anybody want to get us started? We've got about 15 minutes. We could do questions.
What's your favorite comfort food?
Favorite comfort food?
Oh, man.
Yeah.
So black bread from the Russian store with a thick hunk of butter on it, and a carrot salad my mom makes, I think.
Mine's fried chicken, to be honest with you. And I'll also tell you, I think the best fried chicken you can get just like readily, like at hand, comes from the Publix deli. So if you're ever where there's a Publix grocery store, their 8-piece mixed fried chicken box is like, it's hard to beat. Period.
Are they sponsoring you?
No, I wish they. Yeah, if anybody here has connections, I would love to. I'll get back on social media to be a fried chicken influencer if Publix will have me. Did you have a question here up front?
Oh, I did. Have you ever tried to make sourdough or like you have a starter?
Not only do I have a starter, I have traveled with it up to North Carolina so I can keep feeding it. And I fed it at Savannah's house last night. She's not, it's only about 4 or 5 months. So it's a recent journey for me, which is maybe why I'm a little obsessive about it.
There's not good bread to be had in Mobile, Alabama, and so this was like a matter of necessity where Irina's like, I have to do something about this. We can't be at this lack of bread.
I can't keep eating the available bread. I must fix it, yeah.
Other questions? Sorry, say it a little louder.
Oh.
What do you think, Matthew? Thumbs up or thumbs down? It's fun. I mean, if you like it, like a little sweet, a little bit. If you like bourbon, it was fun. It's kind of like it's sort of like an eggnog. If you spike an eggnog, if you like that, you would probably like it. But the fun part was trying the recipe. It was like a recipe from the 1800s, that we followed, and we actually bought raw milk in Boone from this little farm stand, and had it with a couple friends. So it was the experience was much better than the outcome, in my opinion. Okay.
Yeah, we do. It was one of the first things we did when we moved to our new house in Mobile is we live in the city, in an old part of the city, and I'm an environmental reporter, so I was like, oh my God, the soil probably has so much bad stuff in it. So we built raised beds, and we have a pretty decent garden that we're growing stuff in, including another thing you can't find in Mobile for some reason is fresh herbs, which is my favorite thing to cook with. So we have an extensive herb garden. Yeah.
And it is great. It's so hot and humid down there, y'all. I don't know if you've ever been to the Gulf Coast, but it's so hot and humid. And that's nice if you're going on a beach vacation, but when you're there all year, it gets pretty tough. But the great thing about it, growing season,
Yeah.
it is year round, basically. You can kind of grow and have tomatoes and whatever else for most months of the year. And so that is, you can get we had 2 plantings, in our little backyard garden.
And I do like that in our garden, it's a very it's like our family, right? So Southern stuff and Russian stuff. I have my Russian herb garden, and we also grow okra and other. Well, I just grow a lot of dill, basically. Dill and other herbs, but dill is the one that I just can't find in stores in Mobile. Yeah.
Have you ever thought about exploring the Jewish farming community?
Oh, yeah, I've visited them before in Israel. I have family there and whatnot, but yeah, I want a utopia. I want to live in such a place, but no, we haven't attempted it.
Who are your favorite authors or journalists, or what do you like to
Yeah. Yeah, for food journalists. For food journalists specifically?
Journalists or authors?
Just anybody.
Oh, just anybody? What do I like to? Okay, sure. Well, lately I've been obsessing over Willa Cather. I'm reading a biography of her right now. She writes really beautifully about Nebraska, which is where she spent really formative years. A big mentor for Caleb, and we went to grad school together, is Brad Watson, and we both have read all his books, and they're really beautiful, and they're about the South. That's also fiction. And then nonfiction, well, you talk about some of yours.
I don't read too many nonfiction, book-length works. I read a lot of long-form magazine pieces, and that just is kind of what comes to me online, or a friend sends me, or I get recommended. But fiction, I've really, in finishing this novel manuscript I just sent to my agent, I had to kind of, for a number of reasons that we don't have enough time to get into, in order to do that, I had to kind of retreat from contemporary fiction and paying any attention to what is being published and what's going on in it, and just read largely dead people. So it's I've read a lot of Flaubert, I've read a lot of the 19th century Russians, I've read Brad Watson, our mentor and friend from grad school, William Maxwell. There is a living writer who just put out a new book this last year that's fantastic. His name is Paul Harding. It's called This Other Eden, right? But he's got 3 novels. They're really beautiful. I've read some Cather too. We stopped by her hometown last summer on a road trip in Nebraska. But that's been a lot of it for me because, like I said, I needed to sort of retreat in a way to just finish this novel and not feel influenced or anxiety or, I don't know, any kind of pressure I was creating to do something relevant and of the moment, because I'm prone to do that if I don't watch myself. Oh, let me tell you this, and then I see your hand will come to you next. My home community, Arley, Alabama, for almost 50 years now has hosted the Chitlin Supper. It's a fundraiser for the high school marching band, and so they fry chitlins, And then they also smoke chicken, so if you don't want to eat the chitlins, you can have a smoked chicken plate. But it's like musicians play, they have a buck dancing competition, hog calling contest, politicians come speak if it's a big election year. So I've tried those fried chitlins, not a huge fan of it. My mama tells me when she was in the marching band back in high school, that they would get fresh chitlins. Now they get them already cleaned and frozen, but they would get fresh chitlins and they would have to clean them. And I don't know if chitlins are hog intestines, in case y'all didn't know, so you can imagine what they were cleaning out of them. But yeah, not my favorite, but I have tasted. Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Breakfast food.
Breakfast food?
You hate breakfast, but go ahead, see if you can have one.
Yeah, I don't like breakfast. But I mean, this is going to make it sound like all I eat is bread, but it's kind of true. I usually just like eat toast with hard-boiled eggs and some fruit.
I mean, I love a biscuit, obviously, not to be a cliche, but I really do. But my mama, I'll tell y'all this, I wanted to figure out a way to write a piece about it, and I guess if one of y'all beat me to it, it's just so it goes, because I've sat on this for so many years. But my mama makes what she calls chocolate gravy. It's really just chocolate syrup, and she pours it on top of biscuits. And so since I've kind of mastered my homemade biscuits, whenever she visits or I visit her, I'll make a batch of biscuits, and she'll make the chocolate gravy. And so if you like something sweet, it's like hurts your teeth sweet. But if I can't eat that much, obviously, but I wanted to write a story about the origins of it, though, because it's kind of like contested. Some people say it's an Ozark thing, and some people say it's an Appalachian thing. So it's like the two southern mountain cultures, like who kind of originated putting this chocolate syrup on biscuits. And it's obviously very hearty, and when we were more of agricultural societies, you know, people could eat something like that and then go work it off through the course of the day. Whereas me, like going to my desk, I would, you know, I wouldn't live to see 45 probably if I ate that much.
Yeah, we do, and especially when my parents come to town, I make it a point of putting my mom to work and cooking a big feast. But so for my family, our biggest holiday is New Year's. And of course, it's because religion was not allowed in the Soviet Union, but people still wanted to celebrate a version of Christmas. So we have a New Year's tree, we put presents under it, we have our own kind of Santa Claus that, you know, is wears a big like furry robe. And every year we have a big New Year's party at our house. And I guess the past several years we've been cooking a big Uzbek/Russian kind of feast for it. And so I'm kind of learning the recipes. You know, I think a lot of moms are probably like this, or dads, whoever cooks in your house, but she doesn't have recipes for anything. She's just like a little bit of this and a little bit of this, and you mix it for a while, and you know. And so I've been trying to pin her down a bit more and like walk me through the recipes while we do this. But yeah, this New Year's she came and she helped make some of those dishes, and I like introducing that kind of tradition, especially now that we have a young kid.
And I've even gotten involved with cooking. One of my favorite Russian dishes is called herring in a fur coat. Has anybody ever had it or heard of it? It's a Russian casserole is what it is, if you ever had a casserole.
But it's cold.
But it's cold, yeah, but it doesn't matter. It's a casserole. So it's like on top is hard-boiled eggs and some fresh dill. And then I might get the order of the layers wrong, but it's basically like boiled potatoes, carrots, beets, mayonnaise, and then pickled or salted herring, which maybe all that sounds gross in its individual parts, but I'm telling you, when you cook it, let it congeal and get cold, and then eat it, in its alchemy that happens, and all together, it's so delicious. And I was like, when they were explaining it to me the first time, I was like, what? That sounds disgusting. And then I saw it, and I was like, oh, y'all are making a casserole. I was like, I can connect with this now. So, but another hand was up somewhere. Yeah. Fast food.
Yeah. So I'm reporting a story right now, actually. A couple weeks ago, I went to North Alabama to this community called Jasper, and I think this is common all over the South, but that's where I went. And there's a community of old guys that meets there every morning. They call themselves Romeos, retired old men eating out. So they meet there at 6 o'clock every morning, and they just kind of like talk about whatever, gossip, and they spend an hour there, and then they go on about their day. And I got interested in this story because I always think of fast food places as kind of like pass-through places, and in some ways, especially in the South, because they're so ubiquitous, I mean, they are everywhere, you know, it's easy to kind of like naysay them as places, like the food may not be necessarily healthy if you're eating it daily, and like they're places that are easy to dismiss in some ways because people just drive through and whatever. But in this case, they're serving as a real, like, really important community hub. They're a real place of community, and spending some time with these guys, it's not just them, there's shifts. After this group of Romeos leaves, there's another group that comes in, then there's a ladies group that comes in. It's like a really, really important and vital place in the community. And I feel like reporting the story has really shifted how I think about it. I interviewed this academic who, she's a public health person, and she's like, now don't put this on the radio, but you know, I never thought fast food places would be real bastions of democracy and community, but they really are. So I think I've sort of, you know, I'm thinking differently about them. But in terms of eating fast food, this is a constant debate because Caleb loves Chick-fil-A, and I think it's trash. But I really love a Burger King burger for some reason.
Also, she's going to act like she don't like it, but the Bojangles tenderloin biscuit, when they have it, it's like seasonal, you know, but it's just this kind of spicy pork chop on a biscuit. That thing is good.
Oh, when I was pregnant, I wanted that every morning.
I know y'all got to go. Classes end in like 3 minutes, but we can do one more question, and if y'all need to go, then thank you very much for your time and stuff. But yeah, one more. The biscuits themselves? Yeah, they're great.
What do you think is the best fast food biscuits?
A Popeye's biscuit. Yeah, but you can't get like
Not
biscuits.
a
You can't get
Jack's?
stuff in the biscuit like you can Bojangles. Well, Jack's is good too. Yeah, the Popeye's biscuit. I mean, you get those things and you pick them up, and it just like butter is leaking out of it. You know, it's like so amazing. It's probably a butter product, not actual butter. But anyway, I want to let y'all get out of here on time. But thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.